My life was divided into before and after on November 11th, 2020. That day I buried Elizabeth, my wife of 43 years. The doctors spoke of pancreatic cancer as a verdict, but still when she passed, the ground went out from under my feet. I'm 67 and I didn't know what to do with the rest of my life. Our house in Camden, Maine was suddenly too big and empty. 3 bedrooms, a living room overlooking the bay, a kitchen where Elizabeth made her signature blueberry muffins. All of it now echoed with my footsteps. The university where I'd been an economics professor for 35 years offered me a few hours of lectures a week to fill the void. I declined. The thought of standing in front of students and talking about macroeconomics when my own world had fallen apart seemed absurd. Instead, I took up the things I'd been putting off for years: fishing on Lake Meganicook, taking long walks along the shoreline, reading classic literature, and gradually the pain dulled. It didn't disappear. It just became a part of me, like an old knee injury that makes itself known on rainy days. Elliot, our only son, called every Sunday. In the first months after Elizabeth died, he offered to move in with him and Vanessa, but I declined. The thought of living under the same roof as my daughter-in-law made me quietly terrified. Elliot inherited my love of numbers and logic. He works as a financial analyst for an investment firm in Portland, earns a decent salary, but leads a lifestyle that clearly exceeds his income. And that's entirely due to Vanessa. I met Vanessa Winters 7 years ago when Elliot brought her over for Thanksgiving. She walked into our house with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a designer bag that probably cost as much as my son's monthly paycheck. Elizabeth whispered to me then, "Don't judge right away, give her a chance." And I did. Many chances. I watched her ask me over dinner about my career, our investments, my retirement plans. At the time, I considered it polite interest. Now I realize it was reconnaissance. A year later, they were married. Elizabeth made Vanessa a wedding veil from lace she had kept from her own wedding. Vanessa accepted the gift with cold politeness and subsequently forgot it at home. At the ceremony, she wore a veil from a famous designer, which I later learned Elliot had bought with an additional loan. After the wedding, contact became less frequent. Elliot came mostly alone, explaining his wife's absence with work. Vanessa worked as a jeweler in a boutique specializing in designer jewelry. Her work was impressive, refined, with character. Too bad the same couldn't be said for her. When Elizabeth fell ill, Elliot came more often. Sometimes Vanessa came with him. She would sit in the living room with a clipboard, ostensibly working on new sketches, while my son and I tended to Elizabeth. Only once did I notice her linger at the bedside of the sick woman and say something quietly to her. After she left, I asked my wife what they had talked about. "She was wondering if we had made a will," Elizabeth replied with a bitter smile. After the funeral, Vanessa became unexpectedly active. She organized the wake, made arrangements for the catering, even helped me sort through Elizabeth's things. I was too stunned by grief to notice how carefully she was examining the contents of my late wife's jewelry box. It wasn't until Elliot mentioned in passing that Vanessa had shown him Grandma's sapphire ring that I realized Elizabeth's ring was missing, the only thing of value she'd inherited from her mother. When I asked Vanessa about it, she feigned surprise. "Harlan, you must have forgotten that Elizabeth herself gave me that ring before she died. She wanted it to stay in the family." Elizabeth would never have done that without telling me, but I kept silent. Was it worth ruining my relationship with my sister-in-law over a ring, even a commemorative one? After all, what matters is what we keep in our hearts, not in a jewelry box. As time went on, Elliot's visits became less frequent. He always apologized, citing work or home commitments. I didn't insist. He had a life of his own, and if there was less and less room for me in that life, well, that was the natural course of things. One day, it was last spring, I stopped by unannounced. Just happened to be in Portland on business and decided to stop by. Elliot was at work, and Vanessa answered the door. Her face contorted with annoyance for a moment, but she quickly put on a smile. "Harlan, what a surprise! I wish you had called ahead of time. I would have prepared something special." Their house amazed me. The last time I had been here, about a year ago, it had been an ordinary 2-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood. Now in front of me was a 2-story townhouse with marble countertops, designer furniture, and a huge aquarium taking up an entire wall. "You moved in?" I asked, looking around. "Oh, yeah, 3 months ago. Elliot didn't tell you?" We decided we deserved more comfort. After all, life is one, right? I nodded, thinking of Elliot's salary, which was barely enough for their previous living arrangements. Did he get a promotion? I asked, as if by the way. Not yet, but it's a matter of time, she paused. And how are you doing, Harlan? Not thinking of selling the house? It's too big for you alone now, isn't it? It wasn't Vanessa's first attempt to bring up the subject of selling Elizabeth and me the house. I'd always avoided a straight answer. I'm comfortable where I live now, I replied. Besides, real estate prices are down. Not a good time to sell. That was a lie. Prices in Camden, with its scenic views and proximity to the ocean, were only going up. But Vanessa didn't need to know that. My gaze fell on her wrist, where a watch I'd seen in a Cartier catalog stood. The cost of such a watch started at $15,000. That's a beautiful watch, I remarked. It was a gift from Elliot for our anniversary, she proudly displayed it. He's so thoughtful. I remained silent, but inside everything clenched. My son, who had always been sensible and frugal, was now buying luxury items he clearly couldn't afford. What's going on? Over tea, Vanessa talked about her plans to renovate the upstairs, the new jewelry collection she was working on, the trip to Europe they had planned for the summer. I listened and thought about Elliot's credit cards, which must be red hot. As I was leaving, she asked in passing, Harlan, have you thought about helping Elliot with a down payment on a house? He had to take out a mortgage with less than favorable terms. I looked at her for a long moment. Vanessa, if Elliot needed help, I'm sure he would have told me himself. She shrugged as if to say, I was just asking. After arriving home, I called my son. We talked about the weather, his job, my health. Not a word about the new house or financial difficulties. At the end of the conversation, I did ask, how are things with you and Vanessa? Everything good? There was a pause during which I distinctly heard her voice in the background. Everything's great, Dad. Couldn't be better. His voice sounded fake, like a bad actor. I know my son. Something was wrong. From then on, I began to watch more closely. Vanessa regularly posted photos of their perfect life on social media. Dinners at expensive restaurants, new outfits, vacations in the Bahamas. Elliot always looked a little tense in these photos, with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Just like his wife's when we first met. I couldn't ask him directly about his financial situation. He was always sensitive about these matters and would have perceived it as an invasion of his personal space. Instead, I tried to gently offer to help. Elliot, I'm thinking of updating my will. I'd like to discuss some of the details with you. Why, Dad? You're perfectly fine, and you'll live a long time yet. Still, it's wise to do it ahead of time. Why don't you come by my place this weekend and we can talk? Sorry, I can't this weekend. Vanessa has an exhibition. I promised I'd help. It went on like this for months. Every time there was a reason to postpone the visit. Meanwhile, Vanessa's social media feeds were filled with photos of new designer furniture, exclusive jewelry, and vacation scenery. The only bright spot in my life was my friendship with Ruby Simmons, my neighbor. She had moved into the house across the street about a year ago after her divorce. A 60-year-old woman with bright red hair that she stubbornly refused to dye, despite the graying. Ruby worked as a literary editor and spent most of her time at home. We'd started talking after I'd helped her fix a leaky roof. She thanked me with a homemade cake and invited me over for a cup of tea. Since then, our tea parties have become regular. How's your son? She asked one day as we sat on her veranda watching the sunset. I sighed. I don't know, Ruby. He's calling less and less often. When we talk, I feel some kind of reticence. And his wife? You said you didn't like her much. Vanessa, complicated person. I think she manipulates Elliot, forcing him to live beyond his means. But it's his choice, his life. Ruby looked at me carefully. Harlan, you're being overly sensitive. Sometimes you have to intervene, especially when you see a loved one heading toward the abyss. What do you suggest? Telling my son that his wife is a greedy manipulator? He'll just stop communicating with me. She shook her head. No, of course he won't. But you could be more assertive in your desire to help. If he's in a financial hole, pride might keep him from admitting it, I wondered. Ruby was right. Elliot had inherited from me not only a love of numbers, but also stubbornness. He'd rather get into even more debt than ask for help. I'll think about what I can do, I promised. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. Elizabeth's face flashed before me as she held newborn Elliot in her arms for the first time. "Our little miracle," she whispered then. What would she say now, seeing her little miracle lost in trying to please a woman who sees him only as a source of funding for her whims? I made a decision this morning. It was time to act before it was too late. I couldn't let Vanessa ruin my son's life, even if it meant revealing cards I'd kept to myself for a long time. December was always a special month in Camden. The town was transformed. Garlands on lampposts, wreaths of holly on doors, storefronts glittering with holiday decorations. Even the air seemed to be permeated with the scent of cinnamon, pine needles, and the anticipation of wonder. Elizabeth and I used to enjoy this atmosphere together. We went to the Christmas fair, picked out gifts for Elliot, drank mulled wine in the little cafe on the waterfront. Now I was doing it all alone, and the joy of the holiday was tinged with a haze of loneliness. That morning I was just returning from a walk along the waterfront when the phone rang. Elliot's number on the screen was surprising. He usually called on Sundays, but today was Wednesday. "Dad, hi!" His voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Tunam, how are you?" "I'm fine, son." "Did something happen?" "Why all of a sudden, what's wrong?" "Just calling to see how my old man is doing." I smiled. Old man was what he'd called me since he was a teenager, when my inhibitions seemed hopelessly outdated to him. Business as usual, walking, reading, sometimes fishing with Harold. "Listen, Dad, I have an idea. Vanessa and I want to invite you over for Christmas. We'll celebrate together as a family." "What do you say?" I froze. For the past 3 years, I'd only gotten formal greeting cards from them. No invitations. This is unexpected. Usually you're away for the holidays. This year we decided to stay home. Vanessa says it's time to revive family traditions. I almost choked. Vanessa, who hinted at every opportunity that family traditions were a relic of the past, was suddenly championing them. "Sounds like fun, but I've already made arrangements with Ruby." She invited me to Christmas dinner. "Ruby? That's your neighbor?" "Dad, you're not going to spend Christmas with a strange woman instead of your own family, are you?" There was a note in his voice that I couldn't recognize. Resentment, jealousy, or simple manipulation. "She's not a stranger, Elliot. She's a friend." "Still, family's more important. Vanessa is already planning the menu. She wants to make her mom's turkey recipe." Now that was too much. In all the years they'd known each other, Vanessa had never once shown any interest in Elizabeth's cooking recipes. Moreover, she considered home cooking a waste of time, preferring delivery from restaurants or catering services. "Tell Vanessa that's very nice of her. But your mom's turkey recipe calls for marinating for 3 days, and today is December 20th. Pause. I could almost see Elliot frantically trying to think of an answer. "Yeah, uh, I'm sure she's taken that into consideration. Anyway, Dad, we really want you to come over. I'll pick you up on the 24th around 3 in the afternoon, okay?" I sighed. Maybe I'm being too suspicious. Maybe they really do want to have a family Christmas. "Okay, Elliot, I'll be ready." After talking to my son, I called Ruby and apologized for not being able to accept her invitation. She was understanding, but there was concern in her voice. "Harlan, I don't mean to be intrusive, but don't you find this sudden invitation strange?" "It seems," I admitted, "but he's my son. I have to give him a chance." "Of course," she agreed softly. "Just be careful. And remember that if anything goes wrong, my doors are always open to you, even on Christmas Day." I thanked her and hung up, touched by her concern. Ruby had become closer to me than many old acquaintances over the year. I spent the next 2 days picking out gifts. For Elliot, I bought a rare edition of Alfred Marshall's Principles of Economics, the book that had once shaped my own career choice. For Vanessa, choosing a gift was more difficult. In the end, I settled on a neutral, colored silk scarf, expensive enough not to look stingy, but not so expensive as to indulge her passion for luxury. On December 22nd, I decided to drive to Portland for some last-minute shopping. I had to stop at the bank, and then I planned to have lunch at a little Italian restaurant that Elizabeth and I loved. The day was clear and drizzly. After the bank, I decided to walk around downtown, enjoying the holiday hustle and bustle. As I passed a jewelry store, I suddenly saw a familiar figure. Vanessa was coming out of the store accompanied by a tall man with platinum hair. I instinctively retreated around the corner of the building, watching. They stopped at the entrance. The man said something, and Vanessa laughed. Not the polite laugh I'd heard from her in Elliot's presence, but a genuine, hearty laugh. Then something happened that made me freeze. He leaned in and kissed her. Not a fleeting, friendly kiss on the cheek, but a long, passionate kiss on the lips, which Vanessa responded to enthusiastically. I felt the blood rush to my face. So this is how she spends her work days? Cheating on my son, who goes out of his way to provide her with a life of luxury? They headed toward the parking lot, holding hands. I followed at a safe distance, driven by a mixture of anger and curiosity. At the shiny black Porsche, they stopped again for another kiss, after which the man opened the passenger side door in front of her. As he walked around the car to get behind the wheel, I could make out his face, young, with sharp features and a cocky smile. He was about 35, 10 years younger than Elliot. The Porsche pulled out of the parking lot, and I wrote down the license plate number. Not that I planned to do anything with that information, but the habit of detail kicked in automatically. My appetite was gone. Instead of eating lunch at a restaurant, I bought a coffee at the nearest coffee shop and sat on a park bench, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Should I tell Elliot? That question plagued me all the way back to Camden. On the one hand, he had a right to know the truth. On the other, it could ruin his marriage and possibly our relationship. People often prefer not to know the unpleasant truth and often blame the one who brings it. Waiting for me at home was an envelope from Noah Parker, my financial advisor. He usually communicated by email, but he preferred paper correspondence for important documents. I opened the envelope and reviewed the contents. My investment portfolio had shown significant growth, almost 18% for the year. Investments in biotechnology and renewable energy were particularly successful. My total assets now totaled just over $4.5 million. I smiled, remembering Elizabeth calling me a cheapskate for my habit of investing a third of our income. We could travel more often, buy a yacht, build a bigger house, she'd said, but deep down she approved of my financial discipline, realizing that I was building the foundation for our future. And the result, a secure old age and a solid inheritance for Elliot. But now knowing what I knew about Vanessa, I wasn't sure I wanted that money to go to her. She'd probably find a way to make Elliot spend it all on her whims, or worse, go off to her lover, taking half of her son's fortune through the courts. I put the documents away in the safe and dialed Noah's number. "Harlan, good to hear from you." His energetic voice sounded as optimistic as ever. "Did you get my report?" "Yes, Noah, thank you. Impressive results." "You bet. Your decision to increase the biotech portion of your portfolio turned out to be providential. I've told my other clients that you have a nose for promising industries." I chuckled. It wasn't really a sniff, but a careful analysis of trends and hours of studying reports. But Noah liked to give investments an aura of mysticism. "Noah, I'd like to discuss changes to my will." "Sure, do you have any specific ideas?" "Yes, but not over the phone. When could we meet?" "How about after the holidays, say January 3rd? I'll have more time to prepare options." "Great. Also, Noah, tell me, how difficult is it to set up a trust with certain conditions for the beneficiary?" "Depends on the terms." "What do you mean?" "For example, so that the beneficiary can only use the money for certain purposes or receive it in stages." "Ah, I see. Yes, that's quite realizable. We can structure the trust to protect the assets and ensure they are used for the intended purpose. Can we discuss the details when we meet?" "Yes. Thank you, Noah." After the conversation, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking at Elizabeth's picture on the mantelpiece. What would she advise me to do now? To tell Elliot the truth about his wife, or to keep silent, protecting him from pain but allowing him to live a lie? The phone rang. Elliot's number. "Dad, I wanted to check in about Christmas." "You're not allergic to oysters?" "Vanessa's planning on putting them on the menu." Oysters. For Christmas dinner. Elizabeth would roll over in her coffin. "No, no allergies. But Elliot, didn't your mom make roast turkey with cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes with rosemary for Christmas?" "Yeah, but Vanessa wants to diversify the menu. Make it more sophisticated." "I see," I mused. "Elliot, there's something I wanted to talk to you about, preferably in person, not over the phone." Something serious? Are you in good health? There's nothing wrong with my health. Just family stuff. Okay, we'll talk when you get here. By the way, Vanessa is asking if you could bring a photo album of our old family photos. She wants to create a festive atmosphere. A photo album? Vanessa, who has never shown the slightest interest in our family's history, suddenly wants family photos? Of course I'll bring them, I replied, feeling my suspicions growing stronger. Great. I'll see you then, Dad. 24th, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Hanging up the phone, I went to the window. Outside the window, snow was falling, covering Camden in a white blanket. Christmas had always been a time of miracles, but it seemed to me that this year we were in for a challenge rather than a holiday. In the evening, I called Ruby. They're definitely up to something, she said after hearing my story about the strange invitation. A photo album, Elizabeth's recipes, a sudden love of family tradition. That doesn't sound like the Vanessa you've been describing. And that's not all, I paused, deciding whether to share what I'd seen in Portland. Ruby was my friend, but some things were too personal to discuss even with friends, but it was as if she'd read my mind. Harlan, there's something you're not telling me. What else happened? And I told her everything. About Vanessa and her lover, about the black Porsche, about the kisses they weren't shy about showing off downtown. Oh my God, Ruby exhaled. Poor Elliot. Are you going to tell him? I don't know. How do you tell your son that his wife is cheating on him, especially at Christmas? How do you not tell him? Let him continue to live with a woman who disrespects him and cheats on him? I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. It's not that simple, Ruby. He loves her. What if he doesn't believe me? Or believes me, but forgives her and hates me for shattering his illusions? Or what if he already suspects and waits for confirmation of his suspicions? What if he's suffering in this relationship but sees no way out? I was silent, mulling over her words. Either way, Harlan, the decision is yours. You know your son better than anyone. Trust your heart. After talking to Ruby, I pulled the folder with the documents I'd received from Noah out of the safe and went over them one more time. Then I opened my laptop and began to compile a list of changes I wanted to make to the will. I may not have been able to control Vanessa's actions or Elliot's decisions, but I could protect what I had earned in my life from falling into the wrong hands. The next 2 days passed in Christmas preparations. I wrapped presents, found an old photo album, and picked out an outfit for the holiday dinner. All the while, the thought of the upcoming meeting kept me in suspense. Should I tell Elliot the truth or keep silent? Protect him from pain now or from bigger problems in the future? And what was behind Vanessa's sudden interest in our family? On the morning of December 24th, I woke up with a firm decision. I could no longer remain a passive observer, watching my son's life fall apart because of a woman who saw him as a means to an end. If I have to, I'll tell him everything I know about Vanessa. But first, I'll try to figure out what she's up to with this Christmas invitation. Before I left, I put a folder of financial documents in my briefcase. My gut told me I might need them. Elliot arrived exactly at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as promised. I was already waiting for him on the porch with wrapped gifts and a photo album. I decided to take the briefcase with the financial documents at the last minute, following some vague premonition. "Merry Christmas, Dad!" Elliot hugged me, and for a moment I saw him as the boy who once looked forward to the holiday to unwrap presents under the tree. "Merry Christmas, son." I patted him on the back, noticing the new wrinkles around his eyes and the gray on his temples. When had he gotten so old? The drive to Portland took about an hour. Elliot talked about work, about his plans for next year, about the new fitness club he and Vanessa had joined. I listened listening, wondering what was behind this stream of mundane information. He seemed tense, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel often, a habit that gave away his excitement since he was a kid. "Elliot, is everything okay?" I asked when he fell silent, in the middle of telling me about some work project. "Yeah, sure. Just a lot of work lately. End of the year, reports, plans for the next quarter." Elliot and Vanessa's townhouse greeted us with holiday lights and a wreath of poinsettias on the door. The inside smelled of pine and cinnamon, a classic Christmas scent that Vanessa had apparently created with scented candles. Elizabeth would have wrinkled her nose. She preferred the real smells of fresh baked goods and pine branches. "Harlan, Merry Christmas!" Vanessa came down the stairs dressed in an immaculate red dress and perfectly styled. No sign of hours of dinner preparation. She hugged me and kissed my cheek, leaving a trace of expensive lipstick. I smiled politely, trying not to think about how those same lips had kissed her lover 2 days ago. "Merry Christmas, Vanessa. Here, a little present for you." "Oh, you shouldn't have," she said with learned modesty, but immediately weighed the box in her hand, apparently assessing the value of the contents. "Can I open it now?" "Sure." She carefully unwrapped the package and pulled out a silk scarf. A look of disappointment flashed across her face, which she quickly hid behind a smile. "Very pretty, thank you. I was just looking for something like this." Elliot picked up my briefcase and photo album. "I'll take them into the living room." "Make yourself comfortable, Dad." Vanessa made a real holiday dinner. I followed them into the living room, which was decorated with excessive luxury. A huge Christmas tree with designer toys, garlands, candles and silver candlesticks. Everything looked like it was from a magazine cover. Beautiful but impersonal. "Impressive," I said, looking around. "Did you decorate all this yourself, Vanessa?" "Oh no," she waved her hand. "I have too much work to do." I hired a decorator. Of course, a professional decorator. I wonder how much it had cost and from what credit Elliot had paid for the service. The next hour passed in small talk. Vanessa asked me about the past, how Elizabeth and I met, where we lived, how Elliot was raised. I answered with restraint, not understanding why all this sudden interest. "And those pictures are just adorable," she exclaimed, flipping through the album I'd brought. "Ah, Elliot, you were such a sweet kid. And here you are, Harlan, so young. And Elizabeth, what a beautiful woman." Her voice sounded fake, like a third-rate theater actress. I watched her, trying to figure out what was behind the act. "Dinner is ready," she finally announced. "Please come to the table." The dining room was astonishingly elaborate. China, crystal, silverware. Vanessa had clearly made an effort to impress. The menu was far from the traditional Christmas dinner. Oysters, foie gras, lobster, truffles, all the most expensive and ostentatious. "Looks delicious," I said, though I would have preferred a simple turkey with cranberry sauce like Elizabeth was preparing. Over dinner, Vanessa continued to play the perfect daughter, in-law, inquiring about my life, asking about my health, my plans for the coming year. Elliot was mostly silent, occasionally inserting a comment. "Harlan, I hear you're friends with the girl next door?" "Ruby, I think," Vanessa asked, setting her salad down for herself. "Yeah, we're good friends." "Just friends?" There was a hint in her voice that made me inwardly shudder. "Vanessa," Elliot said cautiously. "What, I'm just wondering." Harlan's still young. He's only 67. A lot of men his age are remarrying. After dessert, an exquisite chocolate mousse with raspberries, Vanessa suggested they move back to the living room to exchange gifts. Elliot stayed behind to clean up the dishes, and Vanessa and I went ahead. In the living room, my gaze fell on the briefcase I'd left next to the chair. The zipper was ajar. I definitely remembered closing it. There was something wrong inside. Someone had obviously been going through my things. I sat down in the chair and discreetly checked the contents. The financial documents were still there, but they had clearly been looked through. The order of the papers was out of order. Elliot joined us carrying a tray of coffee. Vanessa was fussing around the Christmas tree, picking out presents. "Here, Harlan, this is from us." She handed me a small box wrapped in expensive paper. I unwrapped the gift. Inside were white gold cufflinks with tiny diamonds. Gorgeous, but totally out of my style. "Very impressive," I said, trying to hide my surprise. "They must have cost a fortune." "You don't have to think about the price of presents at Christmas." Vanessa brushed it off. "Huh. Besides, families should share the best with each other, shouldn't they?" Her gaze slid to my briefcase, and I realized she'd seen the paperwork. Knew about the $4.5 million. That was it. That was the reason for the sudden Christmas invitation, the interest in the family photos, the whole spectacle. "Elliot, your present." I held out the book to my son. He unwrapped the package and his face brightened. "Principles of Economics by Marshall. First edition. Dad, where did you find it?" "From a bookseller in Boston. Remember when I read you excerpts when you were a teenager?" Elliot nodded, flipping through the pages excitedly. "I remember." That's when I decided I wanted to go into economics like you did too. Vanessa watched us with poorly concealed impatience. I could see her tapping her foot on the floor, waiting for the right moment for her next move. Harlan, she finally said with feigned concern in her voice, Elliot and I have wanted to talk to you about something important for a long time. Here it was. It was about to begin. Yeah? I took a sip of coffee, preparing myself for what would follow. We see you living alone in this huge house. It must be so lonely and costly. I noticed Elliot tense up. Vanessa, we agreed that I would have this conversation on my own, he said quietly. She ignored him. Anyway, Harlan, we think you should sell the house and move in with us. We have a guest bedroom we're just setting up. You'll be close to your family instead of alone amongst the memories. I looked at Elliot. He avoided my gaze. Is this your idea, son? I asked directly. We both think you'd be better off with us, he replied uncertainly. What about the proceeds from the sale of the house? I asked, looking at Vanessa. Will they be with you too? Her eyes narrowed, but the smile remained glued to her face. Harlan, what's with the innuendo? We're just concerned for your well-being. Though, of course, if you decided to help us out financially, we'd appreciate it. Elliot works so hard and we have so many plans for the future. Like what, for example? I leaned back in my chair, watching her try to wriggle out of it. Well, we're thinking about a house of our own instead of a townhouse. And maybe a baby in the future. Imagine how wonderful that would be. You being around, helping raise a grandson or granddaughter. And of course, she continued, given your financial situation, you could provide your grandson or granddaughter with a wonderful future. Education at the best schools, travel, opportunities. My financial situation? I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She hesitated for a second, but quickly pulled herself together. Well, you've always been frugal. You probably have a decent amount set aside for your old age, plus a professor's pension, insurance. Vanessa, Elliot said warningly. What? I'm just saying that his savings could do more good if he invested it in our family instead of it lying dead weight. I slowly opened my briefcase and pulled out the financial papers. You mean these papers? The ones you were obviously looking through while I was sitting at dinner? Vanessa turned pale, but quickly pulled herself together. I accidentally saw them when I was looking for a napkin. The briefcase was open. It was closed, I said calmly, but anger boiled up inside. You purposely went through my things, Vanessa. And now that you've found out about my assets, you've decided you're entitled to them. Harlan, she exclaimed with feigned indignation. How can you? I never... $4,500,000, I pronounced the amount clearly. That's what you saw in those documents, right? And now you want me to give that money to your family? Elliot looked stunned. $4.5 million? Dad, you really have that much? I nodded. Yes, the result of 35 years of investing and prudent saving. Money I had planned to leave you when I died, Elliot. But now I'm not sure that's such a good idea. What? Vanessa jumped up. You can't do that. It's family money. You have to help your son, your family. Her face contorted with greed and anger. The mask of the caring daughter-in-law finally came off. Give our family this money, she practically shouted. We deserve a better life. Elliot is your only son. He's entitled to your fortune. I stood up, feeling years of held-back anger finally break through. You want me to give the money to your family? Fine. But first, Vanessa, tell my son about how you bought your lover a Porsche automobile at his expense. There was dead silence in the room. Vanessa froze with her mouth open, her face white as chalk. What? Elliot said faintly. I saw you, Vanessa, I continued, 2 days ago in Portland, with your lover, tall man, platinum hair, about 10 years younger than Elliot. You came out of a jewelry store, kissed right on the street, and then drove off in a black Porsche. Elliot slowly turned to his wife. Is that true? He's lying, Vanessa shouted out, but her voice shook. Your father made the whole thing up so he wouldn't share the money with us. Then explain. My voice was icy. Where did you get the money for a townhouse in an upscale neighborhood? For your Cartier watch? For that ridiculously expensive Christmas decor? For a vacation in the Bahamas? Elliot makes good money, but not that much. I got an inheritance from my aunt. You don't have an aunt, Elliot said quietly. You said you grew up in foster homes. Vanessa scrambled around like a caged animal. Okay, that was my savings. I was saving from my jewelry sales. Your jewelry doesn't sell that well, Vanessa. Elliot looked at her with pain in his eyes. I've seen the reports. You're barely covering the cost of materials. Portia, I reminded her. Explain Portia. What Portia? She tried to feign bewilderment, but it was obvious she was cornered. The black Porsche you drove away in with that man. How do you explain it? It, that's my coworker's car. He just gave me a ride. And kissed you on the lips? A coworker? I shook my head. Elliot, check your credit cards, your bank accounts. I'm sure you'll find payments for the Porsche. Elliot stood up and silently left the room. Vanessa and I were left alone, looking at each other across the table. You ruined everything, she hissed. We could have been a happy family. You never loved my son, I replied. You only loved his money. And when you realized I had more, you decided to get your hands on my fortune too. Elliot returned with his laptop. His face was gray. Loan on a Porsche Cayenne, black 2024. Monthly payment $1,800. Borrowed 4 months ago in my name, he spoke in a lifeless voice. And then there's the credit card I didn't know about, with monthly payments to boutiques, restaurants, hotels. Vanessa turned even paler. Christmas evening had been completely ruined. The living room, decorated in gaudy splendor, was now an oppressive silence, interrupted only by the quiet crackling of the wood in the fireplace. Elliot sat staring at the laptop screen, where a picture of financial betrayal was unfolding before him. Vanessa stood at the window with her arms crossed over her chest, her silhouette seeming fragile and lonely against the falling snow. I stared at them both, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness and relief. The truth had finally come out, but at what cost? My Christmas exposure had shattered the illusion of marital happiness my son had lived in for the past few years. Elliot, Vanessa finally broke the silence, turning to him. Her voice sounded surprisingly calm. You're not going to believe this, are you? Your father is just trying to pick a fight with us. Elliot raised reddened eyes to her. And how do you explain the loan on the Porsche that I knew nothing about? And the credit card with monthly payments at the Marriott Hotel? And the jewelry store? And transactions totaling over $30,000 in the last 3 months? Vanessa took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. Okay, I admit that I've been careless with the money. I wanted to create the perfect life for us, and sometimes I overstepped my bounds. But the infidelity, a lover, that's absurd. I saw you with my own eyes, I interjected. You kissed him on the street, and then you drove off together in a black Porsche. The very one with the loan on it in my son's name. Vanessa turned to me abruptly, her eyes sparkling. You've always hated me, haven't you, Harlan? From day one, I wasn't good enough for your precious son. Not from your social circle, not with your education. And now you're making up these ridiculous accusations to ruin our marriage. Vanessa, Elliot rose from the couch. I found the pictures. She froze. What pictures? In the cloud storage tied to your account. You never log out of it on our home computer. Vanessa's face contorted with horror. You were spying on me? No, I just checked after what Dad said and found dozens of pictures of you two together. You and this Brad, in restaurants, on the beach, even in our bedroom, Vanessa. In our bedroom when I was on a business trip. I turned away, feeling superfluous in this painful scene. It sickened me to think that this woman was not only cheating on my son, but bringing her lover into their shared home. It's not what you think, Vanessa's voice shook. We're just friends, that's all. Friends don't kiss on the lips or take nude pictures in someone else's bed. Elliot raised his voice. I'd never seen him so furious. God, Vanessa, how could you? I was giving you everything I had. Everything? Vanessa laughed bitterly. You call that everything? 80-hour work weeks, perpetual business trips, talking only about work and investments. You've turned into a carbon copy of your father, a money-obsessed workaholic who doesn't notice the living person next to him. Her words hit not only Elliot, but me as well. Was that really how she'd seen me all these years? A man obsessed with money? I'd always thought of myself as simply responsible and prudent, building a secure future for my family. I worked to provide for us, Elliot said quietly. No, so you could have everything you wanted. Everything I wanted? She shook her head. I wanted a husband who would be there for me, who would be interested in my life, my feelings, not just how much I spent in a month. Don't pass the blame, I interjected, unable to stand the manipulation. If you were unhappy with something in your marriage, you could have discussed it with Elliot instead of having a lover and stealing from your own husband. Vanessa shifted her gaze to me, and in her eyes she read pure hatred. Here comes the real Harlan Gibbs, always ready to judge, always knowing the right thing to do. Tell me, Harlan, was your late wife happy with such a proper husband? Or did she also have to seek warmth and attention on the side? I felt the blood rush to my face. This woman had overstepped all boundaries. Don't you dare speak of Elizabeth, I muttered through gritted teeth. You're not worthy to even speak her name. Enough! Elliot pounded his fist on the table. Enough for both of you. Vanessa, I want you to leave. Now. Pack your things and leave. Vanessa looked at him in disbelief. You're kicking me out? On Christmas Day? Where am I going to go? To your Brad's, Elliot replied tiredly. Judging by the pictures, you spend enough time together that he'll take you in. You can't just kick me out like that, she went on the offensive. It's my house too. I have a legal right to it. Half of which you've already spent on your lover, Elliot pointed out. Aaron, don't worry, my lawyers will contact you after the holidays. Lawyers? Her eyes widened. You're threatening me with divorce? Because of a few pictures and your father's words? Because of your infidelity and financial shenanigans, Elliot corrected. And yes, I will file for divorce as soon as the office is open after the holidays. Vanessa straightened, her face hard. Great. Then get ready for a long and dirty fight, darling. I'll take half of everything you own. I'll also sue your father for slander and invasion of privacy. We'll see how you both like laundering all your dirty laundry in public. Elliot turned pale, but his voice remained firm. Do whatever you want, but leave now. I'll take the car, she headed for the door. My car? Elliot raised an eyebrow. No, Vanessa. Have your Brad come get you in his Porsche. The very one I bought him without him knowing it. She froze for a second, then grabbed her phone and left the room. We could hear her coming up the stairs, closet doors slamming. I'm sorry, son. I put my hand on Elliot's shoulder. I didn't mean for it to come out so dramatic. Don't apologize, he shook his head. I should be grateful to you for opening my eyes, though part of me would rather remain in ignorance. And continue to pay for the lavish life of Vanessa and her lover? I couldn't contain the bitterness in my voice. You know what the worst part is? Elliot raised tired eyes to me. Part of me still loves her. Even now, knowing all this, I sat down next to him, feeling my heart clench with pain for my son. This will pass, I said quietly. In time. Right now, it feels like the world has fallen apart for you, but you'll get through it. You're strong, Elliot. Always have been. He smiled weakly. Like Mom, huh? Yeah, like your mom. I felt a lump come up to my throat. She'd be proud of you right now. We sat in silence, listening to Vanessa packing upstairs. After a while, she came downstairs with 2 large suitcases. I'll send for the rest later, she tossed coldly. Of course, Elliot replied just as coldly. She stopped at the door, looking back at the Christmas tree, at the scattered presents, at the unfinished champagne. You know, Elliot, I really did love you. In my own way. Go away, Vanessa. He didn't even turn to her. She opened the door and walked out into the snowy night. Through the window, I saw a black Porsche pull up, the driver getting out to help her with her suitcases. A tall man with platinum hair, the same one I'd seen in Portland. When the car drove away, there was a heavy silence in the house. Elliot sat staring into the void. I didn't know what to say to ease his pain. Shall we have a drink? I finally suggested. It seems like we could both use one. He nodded and I headed for the bar in the corner of the living room. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, a good aged whiskey, clearly from the stock Vanessa kept for special occasions. Here's to getting rid of toxic people. I handed him a glass. He smiled weakly and raised his own. Here's to the truth, however bitter it may be. We drank in silence. The fire in the fireplace began to die down, and I tossed another log. What now? Elliot asked after a long silence. Now you block all your credit cards and bank accounts so she can't withdraw money from there. I spoke practically, realizing it was important to protect at least what was left now. You'll talk to a lawyer tomorrow and start the divorce process. I meant, what about us now? You and me? His question caught me off guard. I'd been thinking about practical steps, about protecting finances, about the legal aspects of divorce, but not about our relationship, which had also suffered in this situation. I don't know, son, I answered honestly. That's up to you. I'd like to rebuild what we had before Vanessa, but I understand if you're mad at me for not telling you sooner. Elliot stared into his glass for a long moment, as if searching the amber liquid for answers to his questions. I'm not mad, he finally said. You were right to doubt me. I wouldn't have believed it. I should have seen the proof with my own eyes. He set the glass down and rubbed his face with his hands. You know, all these years I've felt something was wrong. Too many inconsistencies, too many secrets. But I convinced myself that I was just being too imaginative, that my suspicions were a projection of my own fears. What fears? I asked softly. Fears of not being good enough, not successful enough, not interesting enough for a woman like her. I sighed. Elliot had always been insecure, despite all his accomplishments and talents. In high school, in college, at work, he was always striving to prove himself worthy of recognition and love. You're more than good enough, Elliot. I looked him straight in the eye. You're a smart, decent, hard-working man. The problem isn't you. The problem is her, a woman who proved incapable of appreciating what she had. He smiled weakly. Sounds like something Mom would have said. She would have said it much better. I smiled too, and would have added some wise metaphor that would have put everything in its proper place. We were quiet for a moment, remembering Elizabeth, her warmth, her wisdom, her ability to find the right words in any situation. I miss her, Elliot said quietly. I do too, son. Every day. He stood up and walked over to the window. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in a white blanket, as if trying to hide all its imperfections. You know what the weirdest thing is? He didn't turn around. I feel relieved, like a stone has fallen from my soul. It hurts, yes, but it's easier to breathe. I knew what he was talking about. Living a lie drains the soul, even if you don't fully realize the lie. This will pass, I repeated. The pain will pass, but the relief will remain. Elliot turned to me. Will you stay the night? I don't want to be alone in this house. Sure, I nodded. Just give me a minute. I'll call Ruby. Tell her I won't be back tonight. Ruby? Elliot looked at me thoughtfully. Was Vanessa right about anything? Is there something between you two? I shook my head. We're friends, Elliot. Good friends. She helped me through the hardest time since your mom died. But I'm not ready for a new relationship. Maybe I never will be. He nodded understandingly and returned to the couch. I'll make some tea, I said, heading for the kitchen. Adam, and maybe find something edible. We never had a proper dinner. In the kitchen, I pulled out my phone and dialed Ruby's number. She answered after the first beep, as if she'd been expecting my call. Harlan? How'd it go? I sighed. Not as planned. Vanessa. She went through my stuff, found my investment papers, demanded money. I told her about her cheating. She denied it, but Elliot found proof. Now she's gone, and we're, trying to pick up the pieces. Oh, Harlan. There was genuine sympathy in her voice. I'm so sorry. How's Elliot? Hanging in there. I glanced around to make sure my son couldn't hear me. But he's having a hard time. I'm going to stay with him tonight. Of course. He needs you right now. Ruby was quiet. Tell him I'm thinking about him. And about you too. Thanks, Ruby. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Harlan. Call me tomorrow, okay? I promised and hung up. I made some tea, found some leftover morning pastries in the fridge. Not a holiday dinner, of course, but better than nothing. When I returned to the living room, Elliot was sitting with his laptop, looking through some files. Found something else, he said without looking up. She withdrew 20 grand from our joint account 3 days ago. Probably been preparing for this moment. I set the tray of tea and pastries on the table. Can you get that money back? I don't know. The account is joint. She had as much right to it as I did. He slammed the laptop shut. But it doesn't matter anymore. Money is just money. They can be earned again. You're right. I sat down next to him. Money isn't the most important thing. Elliot took a cup of tea, warming his hands against the hot porcelain. You know, I always thought you were obsessed with money. The constant talk about saving, investing, financial security. I thought it was, well, a little excessive. I smiled sadly. I was never obsessed with money, Elliot. I was obsessed with security. I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, you and Mom would be okay. And then, that you'd be okay. He nodded understandingly. 4.5 million. That's impressive, Dad. How did you manage it? Time, patience, and discipline, I shrugged. It wasn't anything special. I saved and invested a third of my paycheck every month from my first day at the university. Your mom supported me in that, though she sometimes joked that I was too frugal. And that money, they were meant for me? Yes, eventually, I looked him in the eye. But now I think I can structure the inheritance differently. Create a trust with certain conditions to protect the capital from people like Vanessa. Elliot shook his head thoughtfully. No, Dad. It's your money. You earned it with honest labor. It's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. If you want to spend it on a trip around the world or buy a yacht, I'm all for it. I laughed. A yacht? You know how I feel about the sea. I get seasick even on the ferry to Vinalhaven. He laughed too, for the first time that evening, genuinely. On to something else then. The important thing is that you're happy. We finished our tea in a lighter atmosphere, recalling funny incidents from his childhood, stories of how Elizabeth and I had dealt with his teenage antics. It was a kind of therapy, a return to a time when things were simpler and cleaner. Toward midnight, Elliot showed me to the guest room, the same one he and Vanessa were supposedly preparing for me to move into. The room was half empty, with bare walls and minimal furniture. No sign of preparation for a permanent tenant. Sorry about the Spartan conditions, Elliot looked embarrassed. Vanessa never took the time to set up this room. It's okay, I patted his shoulder. I just need a mattress and a pillow. He nodded and headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold. Dad, yeah? Thanks for telling the truth and for staying with me tonight. Always, son. I felt the lump come up to my throat again. I'll always be there for you when you need me. He nodded and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out the window at the snowy city. Christmas was coming to an end, the strangest and most dramatic Christmas of my life. I had uncovered Vanessa's deception, perhaps saved my son from even greater financial and emotional loss. But there was no joy, only quiet sadness and hope that things would get better with time. Before I went to bed, I pulled out of my pocket the picture of Elizabeth that I always carried with me. She was smiling from the picture, and I thought I could hear her voice. You did the right thing, Harlan. Now give him time to lick his wounds. I hope you're right, love, I whispered, touching my fingers to her image. As always, it took me a long time to fall asleep that night, listening to the silence of the strange house, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional quiet footsteps of Elliot, who didn't seem to be finding peace either. Finally, in the morning, exhaustion took its toll, and I fell into a restless sleep. I awoke to the smell of coffee. It was still dark outside the window. The winter morning was just beginning. I got dressed and went down to the kitchen, where I found Elliot at the stove. He was making scrambled eggs and bacon, a simple breakfast I'd often made for him as a kid. Good morning, he smiled weakly. Coffee? I'd love some. I sat down at the table, watching my son skillfully handle the skillet. You look good for someone who's survived a night like this. Elliot shrugged. I hardly slept at all. Too many thoughts in my head. But you know what? I looked at all our finances, all the loans, all the bills. Turns out the situation isn't as dire as I thought. Yeah, I'll have to tighten my belt for a year or two, but I can handle it. He set a plate of breakfast in front of me and sat across from me with a cup of coffee. I'm thinking of selling the townhouse. Too many memories, and I can't afford to keep it alone. A sensible decision, I nodded. An apartment in a nice neighborhood would be more practical. Also, he hesitated, I'm thinking of changing jobs. Maybe even the city. Start with a clean slate. I looked at my son with wonder and pride. Instead of sinking into depression or self-deprecation, he was making plans, thinking about the future. You're strong, Elliot, I said what I felt. Stronger than you think you are. He smiled, tiredly but sincerely. I had a good example in front of me. We ate breakfast in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. Outside the window, it was beginning to lighten, and the first rays of sunlight reflected off the freshly fallen snow, creating the illusion of a new, clean world. Maybe that's what our future would be like. New and clean, without lies and manipulation. Maybe we'll both learn a lesson from this painful story and grow closer to each other. I returned home the day after Christmas. Elliot insisted that I stay a couple more days, but I could see that he needed time to be alone, to process what had happened, and to begin the healing process. In the back of my mind, I wanted to return to my home, where every corner held the memories of my life with Elizabeth. The drive to Camden took a little longer than usual, the effects of the snowfall. Elliot was silent behind the wheel, only occasionally responding to my attempts at conversation. I didn't insist. Sometimes silence was more important than words. When we pulled up to my house, Elliot turned off the engine and turned to me. Dad, I want you to know that I don't blame you for anything. You did the right thing by telling me about Vanessa. I nodded, feeling a weight fall from my shoulders that I hadn't fully realized. Thank you, son. It wasn't an easy decision for me to make. I know, he smiled weakly. I'm sorry I've been distant from you these past few years. It was wrong. You've been building your life, Elliot. It's natural. No, it wasn't natural. It was because of Vanessa. She was always finding reasons for us not to see you. Now I understand why. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling a wave of tenderness rise up inside for this grown man who was still a little boy to me, needing protection. It's all in the past. Now we can start over. Elliot nodded, and I saw his eyes fill with tears, which he immediately hurried to brush away. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Sure, take care of yourself, Elliot. And if you need help with anything, I'm always here for you. We hugged and he drove off, leaving me standing on the snow-covered driveway in front of the house. I stared after his car until it disappeared around the corner, and only then did I turn toward the house. It was cold and quiet inside. I turned on the heat, dumped my bag in the hallway, and walked into the living room. Everything was unchanged here. The books on the shelves, the pictures on the mantelpiece, the old armchair where I liked to read in the evenings. But something had changed, not in the house, but in myself. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying all these years was finally starting to get lighter. I lit the fireplace and sat in a chair, staring at the flames. The events of the last few days ran through my mind like a movie. Vanessa, discovered with her lover in Portland, her fake concern and interest in the family photos, her face contorted with greed when she found out about my millions, her pallor when I revealed her deception. And Elliot, his shock, his pain, his slow, agonizing acceptance of the truth. His determination to start over, despite the heartbreak and financial hardship. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the truth had finally come out. Worry for my son, who now had to go through the painful process of divorce. Anger at the woman who had so ruthlessly manipulated him. And, amazingly, some kind of release, as if the chains that had shackled me all these years were beginning to dissolve. Elizabeth had always said that the truth, however painful, was better than the most convenient lie. Now I was realizing how right she was. My phone rang, snapping me out of my musings. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered. Harlan? It's Vanessa. I felt every muscle tense up. Her voice sounded calm, even friendly, which alerted me even more. What do you need, Vanessa? Just to talk. Like adults, she paused. I realize that you and Elliot are very angry with me right now. And you have a right to be. But I think we could find a compromise that would suit everyone. A compromise? I didn't hide my skepticism. What compromise can there be after what you've done? Look, Harlan. Yes, I made a mistake. I got confused. I got involved with another man. It was wrong. But I still love Elliot in my own way. And I know he loves me, no matter what. What's your point? I think we could give our marriage another chance. With a condition? With some conditions? I grinned. Let me guess. Those conditions include access to my $4.5 million? Not necessarily direct access, she spoke in a businesslike tone, as if she were discussing a business deal. Maybe help with buying a house for Elliot and me, or funding for a business I want to start, or ... quote. Vanessa, I interrupted her, you still don't get it, do you? It's not about the money, it's about the trust you broke, about the love you betrayed. Elliot will never be able to trust you again. You're so sure of that? Her voice grew colder. You didn't see him last night after you left. He called me, Harlan, cried into the phone, said he still loved me. I froze. Had Elliot called her yesterday? Maybe. He'd been emotionally vulnerable, confused, but I doubted he'd asked her to come back. If that's true, that's his business. But you won't fool me again, Vanessa, and I will do everything I can to protect my son from your manipulations. Oh, is that so? Her voice finally lost its friendliness. Then perhaps you should know that I'm pregnant. 2 months, and it's Elliot's baby, you can rest assured. That news hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. Pregnant? That changed everything. If she was telling the truth. You're lying, I said, but without conviction. Check it out if you want. I can send you a picture of the test, or the results of the ultrasound I had done last week. I was silent, trying to gather my thoughts. If Vanessa really was expecting a baby with Elliot, the situation was getting much more complicated. Elliot had always wanted children, unlike Vanessa, who kept putting the issue off. The news of a baby could completely change his mind about divorce. If you're really pregnant, Elliot should know about it, I finally said. But that doesn't change the fact that you've been cheating on him and cheating him financially. Oh, I'm sure he'll find it in his heart to forgive me when he finds out he's going to be a father. She sounded smug in her voice. The question is whether you'll find it in your heart to accept me back into the family. Because Harlan, whether you want me to or not, I will be the mother of your grandson or granddaughter. With those words, she hung up, leaving me in a state of shock and confusion. Is she pregnant? Or was this just another lie to manipulate Elliot and me? Vanessa would have made that up. But what if it's true? What if she really is carrying my son's baby? I dialed Elliot's number, but the phone was disconnected. I texted, call me when you can. It's important. Then I got up and started pacing around the room, trying to calm myself down. Needed to act rationally. Even if Vanessa was pregnant, that didn't mean Elliot should go back to her. Modern courts had devised many schemes for joint custody, child support, and other aspects of parenting by divorced parents. Elliot could have been a good father without being Vanessa's husband. But still, the thought of a grandson or granddaughter growing up in an environment of divorce, conflict, and manipulation was painful. I was so deep in my thoughts that I didn't immediately hear a knock on the door. It was Ruby, wrapped in a warm coat and carrying a basket in her hands. Hello, traveler, she smiled, holding out the basket to me. I thought you could use a proper meal after all the drama. Homemade soup, fresh bread, and some cookies for dessert. I felt a lump come up to my throat. This simple gesture of kindness seemed almost unbearable after everything that had happened. Thank you, Ruby. You have no idea how helpful this is. I invited her in, and we made our way to the kitchen where she began heating up some soup, while I told her about the events of the past 2 days. And now Vanessa claims to be pregnant, I finished my story. Ruby frowned, stirring the soup. And you believe her? I don't know. On the one hand, it seems like another manipulation. On the other, she wouldn't bluff on a question like that, knowing the truth will come out in a couple months anyway. If she really is pregnant, Ruby set a bowl of hot soup in front of me, then it's not necessarily Elliot's baby. I looked up at her. Do you think... I think a woman who cheated on her husband and manipulated him financially is capable of a lot of things. She sat down across from me, including passing off a child from her lover as her husband's child. I wondered. Ruby was right. Given everything we knew about Vanessa, that scenario was entirely possible. But how to prove it? Either way, Ruby continued, Elliot has a right to know about her statement. Let him decide for himself from here on out. I nodded, taking the soup. It was delicious, thick and flavorful, with bits of chicken and vegetables. A real home-cooked meal that I'd missed so much since Elizabeth's death. You know, Ruby said, watching me eat, you look better than I expected. More calm. I wondered. Indeed, despite all the drama and the new twist with Vanessa's possible pregnancy, I was feeling more lighter, like the long, grueling battle was finally over. And now, regardless of the outcome, I could begin to move on. I think the thing is, the truth is finally out, I said, trying to articulate how I felt. All these years, I've watched Vanessa manipulate Elliot, how she's pushed him toward the financial abyss, how she's gradually alienated him from me. And there was nothing I could do about it because I was afraid of losing touch with my son completely. Ruby nodded understandingly. And now that everything has been revealed, you feel liberated. Yes, that's exactly right. Even if Vanessa is pregnant, even if Elliot decides to go back to her, which I think is unlikely, at least he'll be making that choice with his eyes open, knowing the whole truth. We were having tea and cookies when my phone rang. It was Elliot. Dad? I just got off the phone with Vanessa. I held my breath. She claims she's pregnant. From me, I sighed. She called me with the same claim. Do you believe her? I don't know, son. Do you? Elliot was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I'm not sure. We didn't plan on kids. Vanessa was always against it. Said kids would ruin her career, her figure. Now all of a sudden, she says she's pregnant and that it's a sign from above for us. What are you going to do? I told her that if she really is pregnant, we'll do a paternity test. After the baby's born, of course. And that either way, I'm not going back to her. If it's my child, I'll participate in its upbringing, pay child support, everything as it should be. But our marriage is over. I felt a surge of pride for my son. Despite the emotional turmoil, he was thinking clearly and making informed decisions. You did good, Elliot. And what did she say? She threw a tantrum, screamed that I was heartless, that I was destroying the family, that the child would grow up without a father. And then suddenly she changed tactics and promised that she'd change, that she'd go to therapy, that we could start over. And you? I said that my decision was final, that we could be good parents without being bad spouses, and that I would contact her through a lawyer. And how do you feel after that conversation? Elliot laughed softly. You know, weird, but better. Like I've finally taken control of my life. Stop being a puppet. I'm proud of you, son, I said sincerely. After talking to Elliot, I felt more at peace. Whatever Vanessa was up to, my son was strong enough to resist her manipulations. Ruby, who had tactfully stepped out into the living room for the duration of the conversation, returned to the kitchen. Is everything okay? Yeah, I think it's going to be fine, I told her about Elliot's decision. He's a strong man, she said respectfully. Took after his father. I smiled, touched by her words. By the way, Ruby changed the subject, I wanted to invite you to New Year's Eve dinner. I'm having a small gathering, a few friends my age. Nothing fancy, just good food, nice conversation, maybe some board games. I stammered. After all these events, I just wanted to be alone, to make sense of what had happened, to take a break from the emotional upheaval. I don't know, Ruby. I'm not the most fun companion right now. All the more reason you shouldn't celebrate New Year's Eve alone. She touched my arm gently. Look, it's not a raucous party with dancing until morning. It's just a few good people getting together to celebrate the start of a new year. Older people, like you and me, who have a lifetime behind them with their own joys and sorrows. I looked at her hand resting on mine, small with long fingers and a few freckles. The hand of a woman who had become my friend in the hardest of times and was now reaching out to me again. Okay, I said at last. I'll be there. That evening, I got another text from Vanessa. You're going to regret this, Harlan. Elliot will too. I won't let you ruin my life and deprive my child of a father and grandfather. You have until the new year to come to your senses. I didn't answer. Any response would only draw me into her games, and I was too old for that. The next few days passed in relative peace. I took long walks in snowy Camden, met up with a few old colleagues from the university, finally sorted out the papers I'd been putting off for months. Elliot called every night, talking about his steps to finalize his divorce and restructure his finances. Vanessa continued to send me threatening messages that became increasingly desperate and incoherent. I blocked one of her numbers after another. On the evening of December 31st, I put on my best sweater, grabbed a bottle of good wine, and headed to Ruby's house. The snow crunched beneath my feet, holiday lights twinkled in the windows, and there was a sense of the end of the old and the beginning of the new in the air. Ruby met me at the door, radiant in a simple but elegant dress the color of burgundy wine. "Happy Advent, Harlan." She hugged me, and I smelled the light scent of her perfume, something floral with a hint of vanilla. The living room was already filled with guests, 5 people, all about my age or a little younger. Ruby introduced me. Grace and Tom, a married couple who owned a small bookstore downtown. David, a widower and former marine biologist. Mary, a retired music teacher. And Leo, an artist who had moved to Camden a few years ago to paint local landscapes. To my surprise, the evening turned out to be pleasant. We ate home-cooked meals prepared by Ruby and her guests. I felt a little awkward bringing only wine. Drank good drinks and discussed books, movies, politics, and art. No one asked me about my personal life, although I suspected that Ruby may have alerted them to my situation. After dinner, we played board games, laughed at Leo's jokes, listened to Mary play old jazz tunes on Ruby's piano. There was something surprisingly comfortable about this company. No tension, no ulterior motives, no manipulation. Just people who enjoyed each other's company. Near midnight, Ruby turned on the TV so we could see the traditional lowering of the crystal ball in Times Square. We stood with glasses of champagne, getting ready to welcome the new year. 10, 9, 8. Tom started the countdown, and everyone joined in. I looked at these people, some familiar to me for only a few hours, and felt a strange warmth inside. They had all experienced loss, disappointment, hardship. Grace and Tom had a son killed in a car accident. David buried his wife after a long battle with cancer. Mary divorced after 30 years of marriage when her husband left her for a younger woman. Leo lost his art studio in New York City to bankruptcy. Yet they found a way to move on with their lives, to enjoy the little things, to make new connections. They didn't let past traumas define their present. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year! Glasses clinked and everyone hugged each other, congratulating each other. Ruby walked over to me and kissed me lightly on the cheek. "Happy New Year, Harlan. May it be better than the last." "Happy New Year, Ruby. Thanks for getting me out of my hole." She smiled, and in that moment I realized that life doesn't end with family dramas, betrayals, and manipulations. It goes on, in new friendships, in simple joys, in moments of genuine human warmth. Maybe that's the lesson I should have learned from the whole Vanessa thing. Sometimes you have to let go of toxic relationships to make room for something more genuine and valuable. "Here's to new beginnings," I said, raising my glass. "To new beginnings," Ruby repeated, her eyes glowing with warmth and understanding. The April sun was warming Camden, melting the last remnants of snow. I sat on the veranda of my house watching nature awaken, buds swelling on the trees, the first crocuses breaking through the damp earth, birds returning from the south, filling the air with joyful chirping. It's been 3 months since that Christmas evening that changed everything. 3 months full of changes, revelations, and unfortunately, new disappointments. A phone call interrupted my musings. It was Noah Parker, my financial advisor. "Harlan, all the documents are ready," he informed me without preamble. "You can come sign them at your convenience." "Thank you, Noah. I'll be at your place tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning." "Great. And are you sure about the allocation of funds? That's a pretty drastic change to your will." I smiled, looking out over the bay where a few fishing boats bobbed peacefully on the waves. "Absolutely sure it is. Sometimes a drastic change is exactly what's needed." After the call, I went back into the house and started going through the papers on the table. Tickets, hotel reservations, travel brochures. In a week, I was leaving on a trip I had dreamed of my whole life, around the Mediterranean, visiting Greece, Italy, France, and Spain. A 3-month trip that I planned with pedantic care, savoring every detail. Elizabeth had always wanted to take such a trip. We had put it off year after year, first because of work, then because of worries about growing Elliot, then because of financial obligations. And when the opportunity finally came, it was too late. Elizabeth's health had begun to fail. "Next year, Harlan," she said, lying in her hospital room. "You'll see, I'll be well, and we'll go and see all those places we've been reading about." But the next year was gone for the two of us. I had buried her in my dream of traveling together. Now, 3 years later, I've decided to fulfill our shared dream. Alone. Of course, it would not be at all what we had planned together, but I felt I had to do it. Not just for myself, but for her. For the part of her that would always stay with me. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my musings. Elliot stood on the doorstep with a tense expression on his face that had become almost habitual over the past few months. "Hey, Dad, can I come in?" "Sure." I stepped back, letting him into the house. "Do you want some coffee?" "No, thanks, I won't be long." We walked through to the living room and sat across from each other. Elliot looked tired. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkles deeper on his forehead. The last few months had clearly been hard on him. "I got the papers from the lawyer," he said after an awkward pause. "The divorce is official. The judge found adultery and financial fraud on Vanessa's part, so the division of assets is in my favor." "That's good news," I nodded, feeling relieved for my son. "What about her pregnancy announcement?" Elliot grinned, bitterly, without a shadow of mirth. "As you might expect, it was a lie. When I insisted on medical confirmation, she suddenly lost the baby. Convenient, isn't it?" I shook my head. Even now, after everything that had happened, I was struck by the depth of Vanessa's cynicism. Making up a pregnancy and then losing it just to manipulate Elliot and me? I'm sorry, son. On the other hand, though, maybe it's for the best. A baby would have complicated things many times over. "Yeah," Elliot looked out the window, avoiding my gaze. "Anyway, Vanessa's done now. I sold the townhouse, moved into an apartment closer to work, starting my life with a clean slate, so to speak." "I'm happy for you." There was an awkward pause again. Ever since the truth about Vanessa had come out, our relationship with Elliot had been strangely strained. He called regularly, dropped by occasionally, but it was like there was an invisible wall between us. It was as if Vanessa's revelation, instead of bringing us closer together, had created a new distance. "Dad," Elliot finally said, still looking out the window, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been thinking about for the last few months." I braced myself for an unpleasant conversation. His tone didn't bode well. "I'm listening." "I'm grateful to you for revealing the truth about Vanessa," he began, choosing his words carefully. "You saved me from more financial loss and possibly years in an unhappy marriage." But there it was. There's always that but. But why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you wait until the situation was catastrophic? I sighed. It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past few months. I was afraid, Elliot, afraid that you wouldn't believe me, that you'd take my words as an attempt to destroy your marriage because of a personal grudge against Vanessa, that it would create a rift between us. "Isn't that the same thing now?" He finally looked at me. His eyes read pain and disappointment. "Isn't there a chasm between us?" I couldn't deny the obvious. There was indeed a distance between us that hadn't existed before. "There is, but I had hoped that in time." "It's not just that you kept quiet about Vanessa," Elliot interrupted me. "It's that you've been hiding your real feelings from me all these years. You've never been straightforward about what you think about her, about our marriage, about our decisions. You've always been diplomatic, reserved, like you were afraid of hurting my feelings. Is that a bad thing?" I was genuinely surprised. I respected your autonomy, your right to make your own decisions and mistakes. But that's not respect, Dad. That's detachment. Like you were watching my life from the sidelines, like an interesting experiment, not interfering even when you saw me heading toward the abyss. His words hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. Was this really how he had perceived my position all these years? As cold detachment rather than respect for his autonomy? "I never looked at your life as an experiment, Elliot," I said quietly. I was just trying not to be the kind of father who controls his grown son's every move, who thinks he knows best how he should live his life." There's a difference between control and honesty. Elliot shook his head. You could have been honest with me without trying to control. You could have told me you were worried about Vanessa, about our finances, about how she was affecting me. Not dictate what I should do, but just share your observations and feelings. I was silent, trying to comprehend his words. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps in my quest not to be an intrusive father, I had fallen to the other extreme. Become too aloof, too afraid to openly express my feelings and concerns. And also, Elliot continued after a pause, your money, $4.5 million. You never told me you had accumulated that amount. I was going to tell you, I objected. For Mom planned to discuss my will with you, but you kept putting off meeting me. But before that, for years, did Mom know about your condition? Of course. We did everything together, Elliot. She supported my investment strategy, even though she sometimes joked that I was too conservative. So I was the only one in the dark. He shook his head. I'm the only one you kept the truth from. I wasn't hiding it. I was starting to get annoyed. I just didn't see the need to brag about my financial successes to my own son, especially since that money was always intended for you. After I died, of course. That's exactly the problem, Dad. Elliot stood up and walked over to the window. You decided everything for me. What I should know, what I shouldn't know. When to tell the truth about Vanessa, when to keep quiet. How to handle the money you earned, but which you said was meant for me. I stood up too, feeling the anger building inside. Not at my son, but at a situation in which my best intentions had been twisted and turned into something else entirely. I never tried to control your life, Elliot. I just wanted the best for you. All parents say that, he turned to me. But the best from your perspective may not be what's best for me at all. We stood across from each other, two grown men bound by blood but separated by misunderstandings and years of unspoken feelings. What do you want from me, Elliot? I asked finally. For me to apologize for trying to protect you? For saving money for your future? For respecting your autonomy? I want you to understand, he said quietly but firmly, to realize that your silence, your restraint, your correctness, all of it was creating a distance between us. A distance that allowed Vanessa to manipulate me so easily because I was used to not trusting my instincts and feelings. Used to thinking that if you don't tell me something's wrong, then everything's fine. His words made me wonder. Did my restraint really play a role in making Elliot so vulnerable to Vanessa's manipulations? Had by trying to be the perfect father, I had unwittingly contributed to his problems? I'm sorry if my behavior somehow contributed to your difficulties, I said sincerely, but I've always acted with the best of intentions. I know, Elliot sighed, and I don't blame you. It's just, I need time to sort myself out. In my relationship with you, with Vanessa, with the world, I need space to do that. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief. Pain from the fact that my son was distancing himself from me, but also relief that he was finally speaking out everything that had been building up in his soul. I understand, and I respect your decision. Thank you. He headed for the door, but stopped halfway out. By the way, I heard from Ruby that you're going on a trip. Yeah, next Friday. I was a little surprised Ruby had told him that. A Mediterranean cruise for 3 months. That's great, Dad. There was a note of warmth in his voice for the first time in the whole conversation. Mom always wanted a trip like that. Yeah, it was our shared dream. Then, have a safe trip. Bring me a postcard from Santorini. Mom always said it was the most beautiful place on earth. I will. He left, and I was left standing in the middle of the living room, feeling a strange emptiness inside. The conversation with Elliot had left a bitter aftertaste. I understood his feelings, his resentment, his need for space to introspect. But that understanding didn't lessen the pain of realizing that there was a crack between us that might never fully heal. I walked to the window and watched Elliot's car pull away from the house. Something told me it would be a long time before he stepped foot in that house again. That evening, I got a call from Ruby. How did the conversation with Elliot go? She asked without preamble. Did you know he was going to come over? He called me yesterday asking if you'd be home. Sounded determined. I sighed. Yeah, it wasn't an easy conversation. Elliot's kept a lot of things to himself all these months. He thinks I should have told him about Vanessa sooner, that my reticence was creating distance between us. What do you think? Ruby asked softly. I wondered. It was a question I'd been asking myself all day after Elliot left. He's probably right. Partly, I've always tried to respect his autonomy, not to impose my opinion. But maybe in the process I became too detached. Too right, as he put it. Harlan, you were the kind of father you knew how to be. Ruby's voice was full of sympathy. We all make mistakes. We all act out of fear of harm sometimes and end up hurting with our silence. Perhaps, but that doesn't make it any easier. I know. Elliot needs time to sort out his feelings. He's been through a heavy betrayal, a divorce, financial problems. It doesn't go away. Of course, I understand. I was quiet for a moment. But you know what? For the first time in a long time, I don't feel obligated to fix things. Before, I would have agonized at the thought of my son distancing himself from me, would have tried to preserve our relationship at all costs. But now I realize that I can't control his feelings or his decisions. All I can do is give him the space he asked for and go on with his life. That's a very mature approach. Ruby could hear the approval in her voice. And the right one, I think. That's why I'm still traveling, I added, despite the difficulties Elliot and I are having. And you're doing the right thing. This journey is important for you, for your healing. After talking to Ruby, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking up at the starry sky and thinking about my life, about my marriage to Elizabeth, about raising Elliot, about the years after my wife's death, about all the decisions I made based on what I thought was right and best for my family. Perhaps some of those decisions were wrong. Perhaps my reticence did create distance between me and my son. But I couldn't change the past. All I could do was accept its lessons and move on. The next day I went to Noah Parker and signed all the paperwork involved in changing my will. Now most of my estate was not to go to Elliot directly, but to several charities and educational programs. Elliot was still my heir, but would only receive a quarter of my fortune, an amount large enough to live comfortably, but not large enough to attract another Vanessa. Are you sure you want to eliminate the possibility of your son contesting the will? Noah asked as I signed the last document. Absolutely, I was calm. Elliot will understand when the time comes. And if he doesn't, well, that's his right. Back home, I decided to write my son a letter. Not an exculpatory letter, not asking for forgiveness. Just a letter in which I wanted to state my thoughts and feelings without the pressure of a face-to-face meeting. A letter he could read when he was ready. I sat down at my desk and began to write, Dear Elliot, by the time you read this letter, I will be on my way toward a dream your mom and I have cherished for years. The trip to the Mediterranean that we talked about so much but never got around to doing together. Our conversation last night got me thinking about a lot of things. About how I raised you, about the decisions I made, about what I said and what I kept quiet about. You're right, I was a reserved father, maybe too reserved. I was afraid to push you, afraid to limit your freedom of choice, afraid to repeat the mistakes of my own father, who never considered my wishes and feelings. But in the process, I may have fallen into the other extreme. I became too aloof, too afraid to speak my mind or share my observations. It wasn't coldness or indifference, as you might think. It was an inept attempt to respect your autonomy. As for Vanessa, yeah, I saw the red flags from the beginning. I saw how she manipulated you, how she pushed you toward the financial abyss, how she gradually alienated you from me and from the values your mom and I tried to instill in you. But I kept quiet because I was afraid of losing you completely. I was afraid that if I spoke my mind directly, you would choose her over me. And I ended up losing you anyway. If not physically, then emotionally. I don't apologize for my actions or inactions. We each do what we think is right in the moment based on the information available and our understanding of the situation. I did what I thought was best for you, even if from today's perspective those decisions seem wrong. As for the money, yes, I didn't tell you about my condition. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want you to build your life around an inheritance. I wanted you to succeed on your own, and you did. Despite all the difficulties and mistakes, you became a successful, competent, decent man, a man I'm proud of. I've changed my will. Now the majority of my estate will go to charity and educational programs. You're still my heir, but you'll only get a quarter of the total. That's my decision, and I ask you to respect it, even if you don't agree with it. Elliot, I don't know how our relationship will work out in the future. Maybe this crack between us will heal over time. Maybe it won't. But know this, no matter what happens, you have always been and will always be the most important person in my life. You are the best thing that your mom and I have created together. And I love you unconditionally and completely. You asked for space, and I'm giving it to you. I'll be on the road for the next 3 months. During that time, you can think about everything, sort out your feelings, and determine what kind of relationship you want with me in the future. If you want one at all, I'll accept whatever you decide. In the meantime, take care of yourself. And remember, your mom always wanted nothing but happiness for you. So do I. Love, your father. I reread the letter a few times, made some minor edits, and sealed it in an envelope. I planned to send it to Elliot in a week when I was on my way. That way he'd have time to reflect without the pressure of needing an immediate response. In the evening, I sat on the veranda watching the sunset. Ahead was the journey I had dreamed of all my life. A journey I would take alone, but with the memory of the woman I loved more than life. And with the hope that someday my son would find room in his heart for forgiveness and understanding. Life goes on even when everything seems to be destroyed. Wounds heal, scars fade, and new opportunities appear on the horizon. I was ready for this new chapter of my life, a chapter in which I would live for myself and not for others. Not out of selfishness, but out of the realization that you can't forever sacrifice your happiness for people who don't appreciate it. Here's to new beginning, I whispered, raising my wine glass toward the sunset as if making a toast with an invisible interlocutor. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of the surf, reminding me of the vast expanses that lay ahead of me, and about new cities, new people, new impressions. Of a life that goes on despite all the losses and disappointments. A life that I was finally ready to accept in all its complexity and beauty.